What's up, everybody? We're in day 131 of our Bible in a Year series. Still in Second Chronicles. We've got today and tomorrow, I believe, and we will be out of Second Chronicles, moving on. But for the time being, we're still here. So let's jump straight in. Chapter 28 is where we will start today. Ahaz was 20 years old when he became king, and he reigned 16 years in Jerusalem. He did not do what was right in the Lord's sight, like his ancestor David, for he walked in the ways of the kings of Israel and made cast images of the Baals. He burned incense in Ben Hinnom Valley and burned his children in the fire, imitating the detestable practices of the nations the Lord had dispossessed before the Israelites. He sacrificed and burnt incense on the high places, on the hills, and under every green tree. So the Lord, his God, handed Ahaz over to the king of Aram. He attacked him and took many captives to Damascus. Ahaz was also handed over to the king of Israel, who struck him with great force. Pekah, son of Remaliah, killed 120,000 in Judah in one day, all brave men, because they had abandoned the Lord God of their ancestors. An Ephraimite warrior named Zikri called the king's son Masiah Azrikam governor of the palace, and Elkanah, who was the second to the king. Then the Israelites took 200,000 captives from their brothers, women, sons, and daughters. They also took a great deal of plunder from them and brought it to Samaria. A prophet of the Lord named Oded was there. He went to meet with the army that came to Samaria and said to them, "Look, the Lord of your ancestors handed them over to you because of his wrath against Judah. But you slaughtered them in a rage that has reached heaven. Now you plan to reduce the people of Judah and Jerusalem, male and female, to slavery. Are you not also guilty before the Lord your God? Listen to me and return the captives you took from your brothers, for the Lord's burning anger is on you." So some of the men who were leaders of the Ephraimites, Azariah, son of Jehohanan, Berechiah, son of Meshellemoth, Hezekiah, son of Shallum, and Amasa, son of Hadlai, stood in opposition to those coming from the war. They said to them, "You must not bring the captives here, for your plan to bring guilt on us from the Lord to add to our sins and our guilt. For we have much guilt, and burning anger is on Israel." The army left the captives and the plunder in the presence of the officers and the congregation. Then the men who were designated by name took charge. I cannot talk for some reason. Took charge of the captives and provided clothes for their naked ones from the plunder. They clothed them, gave them sandals, food, and drink, dressed their wounds, and provided donkeys for all the feeble. The Israelites brought them to Jericho, the city of palms, among their brothers. Then they returned to Samaria. At that time, King Ahaz asked the king of Assyria for help. The Edomites came again, attacked Judah, and took captives. The Philistines also razed the cities of the Judean foothills and the Negev of Judah. They captured the occupied Beth Shemesh, Ahijalon, and Gederoth, as well as Soko, Timnah, and Gimzo, with their surrounding villages. For the Lord humbled Judah because of King Ahaz and Judah, who threw off restraint in Judah was unfaithful to the Lord. Then King Tiglath-Pileser of Assyria came against Ahaz. He oppressed him and did not give him support. Although Ahaz plundered the Lord's temple and the palace of the king and the rulers, and gave plunder to the king of Assyria, it did not help him. At the time of his distress, King Ahaz himself became more unfaithful to the Lord. He sacrificed to the gods of Damascus, which had defeated him. He said, "Since the gods of the kings of Aram are helping them, I will sacrifice to them so that they will help me." But they were the downfall of him and of all Israel. Then Ahaz gathered up the utensils of God's temple, cut them into pieces, shut the doors of the Lord's temple, and made himself altars on every street corner in Jerusalem. He made high places in every city of Judah to offer incense to other gods, and he angered the Lord, the God of his ancestors. As for the rest of his deeds and all his ways from beginning to end, they are written in the book of the kings of Judah and Israel. Ahaz rested with his ancestors and was buried in the city in Jerusalem, but they did not bring him into the tombs of the kings of Israel. His son Hezekiah became king in his place. Chapter 29. Hezekiah was 25 years old when he became king, and he reigned for 29 years in Jerusalem. His mother's name was Abijah, daughter of Zechariah. He did what was right in the Lord's sight, just as his ancestor David had done. In the first year of his reign, in the first month, he opened the doors of the temple, the Lord's temple, and repaired them. Then he brought in the priests and Levites and gathered them in the eastern public square. He said to them, "Hear me, Levites, consecrate yourselves now and consecrate the temple of the Lord, the God of your ancestors. Remove everything impure from the holy place. For our ancestors were unfaithful and did what was evil in the sight of the Lord our God. They abandoned him, turned their faces away from the Lord's dwelling place, and turned their backs on him. They also closed the doors of the portico, extinguished the lamps, and did not burn incense, and did not offer burnt offerings in the holy place of the God of Israel. Therefore the wrath of the Lord was on Judah and Jerusalem, and he made them an object of terror, horror, and mockery. As you see with your own eyes, our fathers fell by the sword, and our sons, our daughters, and our wives are in captivity because of this. It is in my heart now to make a covenant with the Lord, the God of Israel, so that his burning anger may turn away from us. My sons, don't be negligent now, for the Lord has chosen you to stand in his presence, to serve him, and to be his ministers and burners of incense." Then the Levites stood up, Mahath, son of Amasai, and Joel, son of Azariah, from the Kohathites, Kish, son of Abdi, and Azariah, son of Jehalelel, from the Merarites, Joah, son of Zimmah, and Eden, son of Joah, from the Gershonites, Shimri, and Jeuel, from the Elizaphanites, Zechariah from Mataniah and the Asaphites, Jethiel and Shimei from the Hamanites, Shemaiah and Uzziel from the Judithites. They gathered their brothers together, consecrated themselves, and went according to the king's command by the word of the Lord to cleanse the Lord's temple. Something that just kind of, stuck out to me. Imagine the feeling of being one of these kings that turns back to God, and like as soon as you die, now this obviously depends on what you think happens immediately after you die, but let's say you're aware of things going on Earth. As soon as you die, you see everyone turns right back. Especially if you've put effort into trying to turn people back towards God. I imagine that would be frustrating. Verse 16. The priests went to the entrance of the Lord's temple to cleanse it. They took all the unclean things they found in the Lord's sanctuary and the courtyard of the Lord's temple. Then the Levites received them and took them outside to the Kidron Valley. They began the consecration on the first day of the first month, and on the 8th day of the 8th month they came to the portico of the Lord's temple. They consecrated the Lord's temple for 8 days, and on the 16th day of the first month they finished. Then they went inside to King Hezekiah and said, "We have cleansed the whole temple of the Lord, and all the altar of burnt offerings and all its utensils, and the table and the row of the bread, table for the rows of the bread of the presence and all its utensils. We have set up and consecrated all the utensils that King Ahaz rejected during his reign when he became unfaithful. They are in front of the altar of the Lord." King Hezekiah got up early, gathered the city officials, and went to the Lord's temple. They brought 7 bulls, 7 rams, 7 lambs, 7 male goats as a sin offering for the kingdom, for the sanctuary, and for Judah. Then he told the descendants of Aaron, the priest, to offer them to the altar of the Lord. So they slaughtered the bulls, and the priests received the blood and splattered it on the altar. They slaughtered the rams and splattered the blood on the altar. They slaughtered the sorry, that confused me. They slaughtered the rams, splattered the blood on the altar. They slaughtered the lambs and splattered the blood on the altar. Then they brought the goats for the sin offering right into the presence of the king and the congregation, who laid their hands on them. The priests slaughtered the goats and put their blood on the altar for a sin offering to make atonement for all Israel. For the king said that the burnt offering and sin offering were for all Israel. Hezekiah stationed the Levites in the Lord's temple with cymbals, harps, and lyres according to the command of David, Gad, the king's seer, and the prophet Nathan, for the command was from the Lord through his prophets. The Levites stood with the instruments of David, and the priests with the trumpets. Then Hezekiah ordered that the burnt offering be offered on the altar. When the burnt offerings began, the song of the Lord and the trumpets began, accompanied by the instruments of King David of Israel. The whole assembly was worshiping, singing the song, blowing the trumpets. All this continued until the burnt offering was completed. When the burnt offering were completed, the king and all those present with him bowed down and worshipped. Then Hezekiah and the officials told the Levites to sing the praise of the Lord in the words of David and the seer Asaph. So they sang praises and rejoicing, they knelt low and worshipped. Hezekiah concluded, "Now you are consecrated to the Lord. Come near and bring sacrifices and thanksgiving offerings to the Lord's temple." So the congregation brought sacrifices and thanksgiving offerings and all those with willing hearts brought burnt offerings. The number of burnt offerings the congregation brought was 70 bulls and 100 rams and 200 lambs. All these were a burnt offering to the Lord. 600 bulls and 3,000 sheep and goats were consecrated. However, since there were not enough priests, they weren't able to skin all the burnt offerings, so their Levite brothers helped them until the work was finished and until the priests consecrated themselves, for the Levites were more conscientious to consecrate themselves than the priests were. Furthermore, the burnt offerings were abundant along with the fat of the fellowship offerings and with the drink offerings for the burnt offerings, so the service of the Lord's temple was established. Then Hezekiah and all the people rejoiced over how God had prepared the people, for it had come about suddenly. Chapter 30. Then Hezekiah sent word throughout all Israel and Judah, and he also wrote letters to Ephraim and Manasseh to come to the Lord's temple in Jerusalem to observe the Passover of the Lord, the God of Israel. For the king and his officials and the entire congregation in Jerusalem decided to observe the Passover of the Lord in the 2nd month, because they were not able to observe it at the appropriate time. Not enough of the priests had consecrated themselves, and the people hadn't been gathered in Jerusalem. The proposal pleased the king and the congregation, so they affirmed the proposal and spread the message throughout all Israel, from Beersheba to Dan, to come to observe the Passover of the Lord, the God of Israel, in Jerusalem, for they hadn't observed it often as prescribed. So the couriers went throughout Israel and Judah with letters from the hand of the king and his officials, and according to the king's command, saying, Israelites, return to the Lord, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, so that he may return to those of you who remain, who have escaped the grasp of the kings of Assyria. Don't be like your ancestors and your brothers who were unfaithful to the Lord, the God of their ancestors, so that he made them an object of horror, as you yourselves see. Don't become obstinate now, like your ancestors did. Give your allegiance to the Lord, and come to his sanctuary that he has consecrated forever. Serve the Lord your God, so that he may turn his burning anger away from you. For when you return to the Lord, your brothers and your sons will receive mercy in the presence for their captors, and will return to this land. For the Lord your God is gracious and merciful. He will not turn his face away from you if you return to him. The couriers traveled from the city to city in the land of Ephraim and Manasseh, as far as Zebulun, but the inhabitants laughed at them and mocked them. But then, from Asher, Manasseh, and Zebulun humbled themselves and came to Jerusalem. Also, the power of God was at work in Judah to unite them, to carry out the command of the king and his officials by the word of the Lord. A very large assembly of people was gathered in Jerusalem to observe the festival of unleavened bread in the 2nd month. They proceeded to take away the altars that were in Jerusalem, and they took away the incense altars and threw them into the Kidron Valley. They slaughtered the Passover lamb on the 14th day of the 2nd month. The priests and Levites were ashamed, and they consecrated themselves and brought burnt offerings to the Lord's temple. They stood at their prescribed post according to the law of Moses, the man of God. The priests splattered the blood received from the Levites, for there were many in the assembly who had not consecrated themselves, and so the Levites were in charge of slaughtering the Passover lambs for every unclean person, to consecrate the lambs to the Lord. A large number of people, many from Ephraim, Manasseh, Issachar, and Zebulun, were ritually unclean, yet they had eaten the Passover, contrary to what was written. But Hezekiah had interceded for them, saying, May the good Lord provide atonement on behalf of whoever sets his whole heart on seeking God, the Lord, the God of his ancestors, even though not according to the purification rules of the sanctuary. So the Lord heard Hezekiah and healed the people. The Israelites who were present in Jerusalem observed the festival of unleavened bread 7 days with great joy. And the Levites and the priests praised the Lord day after day with loud instruments. Then Hezekiah encouraged all the Levites who performed skillfully before the Lord. They ate at the appointed festival for 7 days, sacrificing fellowship offerings and giving thanks to the Lord, the God of their ancestors. The whole congregation decided to observe 7 more days, so they observed 7 days with joy. For King Hezekiah of Judah contributed 1,000 bulls and 7,000 sheep for the congregation. Also, the officials contributed 1,000 bulls and 10,000 sheep for the congregation, and many priests consecrated themselves. Then the whole assembly of Judah, with the priests and Levites, and the whole assembly that came from Israel, the resident aliens who came from the land of Israel, and those who were living in Judah rejoiced. There was great rejoicing in Jerusalem, for nothing like this was known since the days of Solomon, son of David, the king of Israel. Then the priests and Levites stood to bless the people, and God heard them, and their prayer came into his holy dwelling place in heaven. Okay. That is it for the reading for today. I do think it's kind of crazy to see how much back and forth there is. I think I don't know. I think we can kind of see similar in our world, in our lives. I know even I was thinking about this while I was reading it, but there's things like confronting people in the church who are wrong, right? That is something that I think for the last generation, maybe two prior to me, I think there's a lot of hesitancy to do, and there's a lot more like, let's just go along to get along. Unless it's blatant, like heresy, something like that, there's not really a willingness to confront and almost an aversion to the confrontation. But if I look at my generation that's in the church, I see a lot more willingness to call people out and trying to set the church back on a right path, if that makes sense. And so I do think it kind of seems like it fluctuates back and forth some. Because looking back prior to those generations, we did see some people who were willing to make a stand even when it was unpopular. I'm not saying everybody in the previous generation or everyone in my generation is one way or another. It's a mixed bag. But I'm just saying the overall of what I see personally, and maybe it's just my observation, maybe it's not any credence to it, but yeah. Okay, question 1. Ahaz's adultery in chapter 28 leads to Judah's devastation. How does his rebellion challenge us to consider the consequences of turning from God's covenant, and what does it reveal about the cost of pursuing false securities? Well, turning from God's covenant is obviously going to lead to a lot of bad. I think it can lead to a lot of bad here in this life, but ultimately, in the life to come, it's going to be very, very bad. Regardless of what you believe. It's definitely not going to be good. Now, the cost of pursuing false securities, it's just that you're giving up something that's good for something that's not even real, something that pretends to be good. So that's a really bad trade-off. Doesn't work. Question 2. Hezekiah's cleansing of the temple in chapter 29 restores true worship. How might this act prompt us to reflect on the importance of removing spiritual clutter to renew our devotion to God's presence? Yeah, I could see this being something. Now, I do want to be careful because not everything we read in the Old Testament is a direct one-to-one comparison where, God is saying remove the spiritual clutter from your life. There's a lot of charismatics that do that, and I don't think you can do that with the Old Testament especially. But there is an idea that seems to be represented here somewhat. And I do think it can be important in our lives to remove the excess, to get rid of stuff that is going to draw us away from God. I've got phones, things like that. If I'm trying to do dedicated time to God, I try to keep my phone out of it, keep my phone away, turn notifications off like that, because it's something extra that's not needed, and it can draw me in and away from God. Even if it's only temporary for that moment, it just gets my attention. It can draw me in and draw me away from God. So definitely you want to try to find things like that and do what you can to limit them or get rid of them. Question 3. The inclusive Passover in chapter 30 welcomes even Israel's remnant. For welcoming even Israel's remnant shows God's mercy. How does this celebration invite us to wrestle with the depth of God's desire to reconcile his people, foreshadowing Christ's universal call to salvation? It is a universal call to salvation. We see here that there was a welcoming back together, and I think that is a good part of what we see in the New Testament. Is, the Gentiles are grafted into this family tree, and the Jews who rejected Jesus are going to accept him. Um, so there is this pursuit, if you will, of bringing everyone together and trying to reach everyone and bring them under this family tree of that is Christianity. That doesn't mean that you need to accept things that are false, that go against Scripture, and just so that you can claim that they are under this umbrella. But it means you need to find people who believe something that is false and try to get them to trade that for something that is true. And that is essentially the gospel presentation. So, appreciate everyone watching and listening up to this point. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. I enjoy seeing the comments and interacting with people as much as I possibly can. If this has been a blessing to you, you can spread the word. Word of mouth is the best way that podcasts spread. And so if it's been a blessing to you, you can share it to somebody else, and it can maybe be a blessing to them as well. Help them stick with the daily Bible reading plan on their own. And tomorrow, I believe tomorrow, we're in the last day of 2nd Chronicles, so it'll be good. It'll be interesting. Don't go anywhere. You're not going to want to miss it. And we're just going to keep plugging away. It's going to keep getting more and more interesting. And we'll see you then. Thanks. God bless.